So, welcome everyone. I'm Alexander Mihalcea, and today we're joined by Richard Britton, managing consultant of Alchemist. Thank you for being here.
No, no worries. Thanks for having me. Pleasure.
Before we dive in, could you give us a quick overview of what Alchemist does?
Yeah, sure. Aldemis is a general consultancy, mostly focused on fintech. The main purpose is to make sure that tech and business fully align. So I'm having a number of discussion with CEOs and CTOs that feel that sometimes there's a bit of bridge of communication. I launched Aldemis fairly recently. Until a few months ago, I was the CEO for a fintech called Lyrex, which was playing in the banking as a service space. So it's really capitalizing on my technology background, but as well with the CEO experience to make sure that tech fully deliver for business.
Okay, that's fascinating. And what inspired you to join Alchemist? Was there a specific moment or experience that sparked this journey?
I think it's always been, I've always used Aldemis as a consultancy vehicle to some extent from way back. But I think the reason to really relaunch it is growing sense that, I guess, growing frustration that technology wasn't used to its full potential. There was a number of situations where I could see CTOs on board tables struggling to get some of the tech important concept understood and getting the right buying from the rest of the board. And equally, I could hear CEOs being concerned about tech being built for the sake of tech or not really understanding the return on investment or things like that. So, and because I've always been really passionate about both tech and business, I really wanted to help bridge that gap, kind of making sure everyone's understood what everyone else is doing and kind of, pushing in the same direction and helping resolve some of those challenges.
Okay, and as a whole, what drew you to focus on the fintech and financial sector?
I think for primarily fintech, but you're right, it's the larger financial piece. I mean, to give a bit about my background, I spent my early career building stock exchanges and trading platform, as well as core banking systems. I've always been in that kind of larger financial ecosystem, but more recently into fintech. The thing we really focus on is, I think, kind of the harder aspect of fintech, situation where you need low latency, when you need high throughput, automation. It's something that comes up a lot as well. How do you reduce your cost of operation or cost of customer onboarding through automation and through technology? So that's really the pieces that we focus on. And obviously that extends to some situation where we would help around, you know, investor funding and fundraising from that technology aspect.
Okay, interesting. And for example, what's been your most valuable learning experience in this industry?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think these two things that spring to mind. From a business point of view, it's the usual, like kind of what people sometimes say in build it well and customer will come. That's never been my experience. I think, yeah, you can build it great, but if you don't market it, if you don't talk about it, the customer will come is difficult. So you need to build it well. But, I think sometimes there are, especially in fintech that are led by technical founders, it's often easy to build an amazing piece of tech, an amazing platform, and think that the rest will fall in line. It will definitely help, but there are other things you need to do to make sure that you're growing to the pace that you want. The other learning that springs to mind is being careful about anticipating what customer wants. And I've seen, and myself, I've built solution where I was sure people would want it. I spent time building something and actually customer wants, 10% of it. And when they start using it and when you start having discussion, you realize that it's merging into another direction. So I would say, going back into the MVP, just build a strict minimum, speak to your customer and build on that customer need and experience is more important than just trying to anticipate
Yeah, right.
as much as possible.
Right. So let's go back to when you first started. So, what major challenges or gaps did you see in the market that made you think this needs to be solved?
Yeah, it's going back to those board discussion um, around miscommunication and frustration. One clear example of that is I was sitting on the board about 18 months ago, just as a general advisor, slash observer. Um, and there was a discussion between a chief technical officer and a chief financial officer, and to some extent with the CEO as well. But effectively, the whole discussion, I mean, there was a lot of background and most political, baggage in that discussion. But the discussion became about the chief technical officer having to justify what a DevOps engineer was doing, right? And the CEO was non-technical founder, the CFO wasn't technical, and the CTO really struggled to articulate what are DevOps and why they're needed, and why, in that case, the salary bracket might be slightly different than other type of
Yeah.
engineers. And that became really apparent that there was a gap. From my point of view, wearing both the technical and business hat, I think what the CTO wanted to do was the best for the business, but the CTO struggled to get the traction. So what happened after that board is I reached out to the CFO, had a kind of, off the record discussion, reached out to the CEO, and that decision against the CTO was overturned fairly quickly. But that's really what the moment I realized, like, you're right. I think the main challenge the CTO was facing at the time is that the CTO was still using a number of technical words to describe the situation, where I just went back to, layman's term, pure business, already focused on cost saving with the CFO, already focused on the business benefit to the CEO. And that's what I think helped unlock that discussion. So that was one of the first moments where I realized, well, wait a minute, there are still some of those gaps happening today in kind of decent mid-sized businesses.
Yeah, because that's very interesting. And for example, could you elaborate on why the existing solutions weren't meeting these needs?
Yes, I think if you look at a lot of consultancy out there, they focus on one of the they focus either on technology or on business. I don't know of many consultancies that really cover both sides, really look at how both work. And a lot of them focus on how do you build technology, how do you deliver good technology, like, and the usual project management. But at board level, there isn't a clear integration with the C-suite. So CEO, in that example, CFO, COO, some of the advisors. Everyone needs to understand where it's going and be on the same page to be comfortable they're spending the right money in the right places, especially in situation where what we're seeing on the market today, where budgets are getting tighter, it's a bit more difficult to raise money. People want to make sure that they're cutting the right area, making sure that you're focusing on the right thing is really, really important. Then you have the consultancy that focus really much on the business side, but often struggle to articulate what they need from the tech team. Like the CTO brief become very, very high level. And it's fine. I mean, most CTOs that are in institution are really, really good, but still it doesn't help. We could help them a little bit more, to focus on the right things. So yeah, I think the current solution don't go far enough either way. You know, either, business not enough into tech and not enough into business. So that's really what Aldemis is focusing on.
Yeah, right. Because, for example, this was my next question. So, walk us through how Aldemis addresses these challenges. What makes your approach unique?
Yeah, I think it's really the unique piece of the approach is that every single challenge, decision, question, we always go back into how does that benefit the business,
Mhm.
right? You're about to spend a pound in technology. How do we demonstrate that that pound in technology is right? How is that going to contribute to more than a pound in the revenue, in the valuation? A lot of businesses are still trying to grow their valuation effectively, either it's through revenue or other metrics, but they will want to grow their valuation. So how do you make sure that, every pound invested in technology directly contributes to your valuation? And that's really the focus we're having. And I think it's right for technology, it's right for the business, but it's right for the technology as well. And interestingly, when we first engage, sometimes there's sometimes a bit of a, you know, question mark on the technology side of, oh, wait a minute, we're going to have to justify, we're going to have to, we're going to be asked more questions. And actually, when we start engaging, it's not the case. What we find is that when you explain to technology team that this piece of work is going to really contribute to the business and this one less so, everyone wants to help the business. So what we find is that the team naturally align to the pieces that are really contributing to the business. And now you can explain it. And I'll give you an example of that is we joined, was probably 5, 6 years ago now, but we joined the business to effectively to improve the business had a perception of development quality issue. Um, it was an old piece of technology. The software had probably been around for 10, 12 years, wasn't really motivating to work on, was kind of the usual, there was not many new features. It was pure BAU and things like that. And the tech team was motivated, but wasn't greatly motivated. Because of that, there was a perception of quality issue within the dev team. I mean, the reality is that when project fail, it's never just one team, right? So the issue was larger than that. But there was a perception that the tech team wasn't delivering. And what we did, we turned on. The first thing we did is we took the whole team in a room. It was a team of about 25 people. We took the whole team in the room working on that old, cash cow type of product. And I'd asked the COO and the chief product officer to come in and to explain where the product fit in the overall businesses. And what they explained during that meeting to developers is that, yeah, it was an old product. It was going to be retired. The product has a, shelf life of about 3 years still or something like that. But the product was contributing to 80% of the business revenue. And when they articulated how important it was for the business, and they were saying, you guys, you 25 people are generating 80% of the revenue for that, I think there were 300 large organization, for the 300 people in the organization. That's where 80% of the revenue is coming from what you guys are doing, right? When there is a bug happening, which is critical, that revenue is going to decrease. So the fact that you're fixing bugs quickly allows us to maintain that. And then they explained what they were going to do with the team and the plan into moving to a new product and what was going to happen post 3 years. But just that message of saying, look, your 25 people are generating revenue for 80% of everyone here. That just made a massive difference in the kind of the approach. And we saw a difference in the tech team delivery. Like I said, the overall perception was larger than that. Once we fixed tech, we had to look at other pieces. But mapping technology with business is extremely, extremely powerful.
Yeah, 100%. And for example, when you talk to potential clients, what's the biggest misconception they typically have about what you do?
So some of the typical misconception is the biggest is the one I described, that it is going to annoy technologists. It is going to become a challenge or a barrier for technologists. That's the biggest misconception. Because usually we're selling mostly to CEOs and COOs. We're able to explain that. But even when we sell to a CTO, let's say, we're able to explain from past projects that actually it's not the case. And a lot of situation is really about helping them. If I look at the example of the DevOps engineer, bridging that gap also helps them. So one of the difference in the approach from a technology point of view is that technologies don't have to explain us why we need to address technical debt. They don't have to explain us the benefit of testing automations. They don't have to explain us some of those basic tech concepts. We get it, right? My background is as a developer. We're delivering technology projects all the time. So all of that, we can go right away to the business and kind of help articulate that. The second misconception is that it's around cost. How are we going to get the return on investment? And I think that one all depend on the size of the business. If it's less than 10 people business and the revenue is very small, we probably won't engage to start with because we feel we won't deliver the value. For slightly larger businesses, making sure that that you fully leverage technology has a real benefit. In some projects, we were able to cut onboarding time by 80%. We were able to drastically reduce operational costs, things like that. So we can demonstrate very clearly how those metrics works, and we have a number of project examples on our website. But yeah, that would be the two biggest misconceptions.
Also, could you share a specific success story of a client who saw significant results using your solution?
Yeah, I mean, there are a few of them that springs to mind. Going back into going back into the team generating 80% of the revenue, we primarily engaged because the customer was had started a regulatory project. So the customer, I think we engaged in November, and the customer needed the project to go live. I think it was March or April, something like that. I mean, I remember roughly 6 months project, and they realized very quickly that things were going wrong, things couldn't be done. So I think they had engaged. I think they had started the project 3 months before speaking to us, and they already had forecasted 6 months delay. I mean, like was the typical, really bad stuff happening. So we engaged. We were quite um, drastic around what could be done and what could not be done. And I think it's another difference in our approach. We're not afraid of having difficult discussion, but people know exactly what's feasible or not. And effectively, through our engagement, they managed to hit their timeline. And I remember the whole business thought that it was never going to be feasible. I mean, they were really. And yeah, we were able to meet the timeline, and they didn't have to decommission anything. The situation, if the project had failed, they would effectively have had to switch off those 80% revenue until we could deliver. So there was a very large impact for them. Some of those success story is on a smaller scale. We helped. It was a new startup, probably a couple of years ago, but happened what sometimes happen is that was two co-founder, one business, one technologist, and they just had an argument. So the technologist kind of left with the tech team,
Yeah.
and the business person was left with the source code and a bit of documentation, but not many, and was like, oh, what do I do with that? And in order to keep customer contract, they had to be live within 3 months. That's someone I knew personally, so we were able to engage very quickly. But effectively, a friend of mine that contacted me and said, "Hey, here is the situation." We jumped in, recovered from source code, and effectively, fixed few bugs and managed to get live in 3 months. There are a number of others. I mean, again, some are on our website, but it's about reducing the cost of onboarding and automation. It's a big one. Not through Aldemis, but prior to that, a project I led was automating the testing for a stock exchange. And effectively, what had happened is that the stock exchange ended up being in a situation where they were changing their API provider. So they were changing their whole client API.
Hmm.
And that change was they only got access to the API on Monday, and they had to be retested and live on the Friday.
Yeah.
You can imagine retesting the whole exchange, right? So we spent a lot of time prior to that. I can't remember the exact situation. I think it was a configuration thing. I can't remember why it took so long to get the new one available. But anyway, we had 3 months. We knew that 3 months prior to going live. So we spent a lot of time in those 3 months to automate everything. And when the new API dropped on the Monday in the test environment, we were able to retest everything within 2 hours, get that to the provider. Provider was really quick at fixing bugs, and effectively by the Wednesday, all bug had been fixed, had been ready to go live. And so that's some of the things which would. But again, it's really about what does the business need, how can we do that, and there's also an element of maybe you need to compromise on a couple of the nice to have points. So yeah, few
Yeah,
examples.
interesting. And now, looking at a broader industry, what key trends are you seeing emerge?
In the fintech industry, I mean, the massive one that everyone talks about is AI, but from what we're seeing, the fintech industry is still, I mean, there are few businesses at the periphery of it that use AI extensively, but as a whole, we are not seeing a massive shift to AI. We're seeing some element of automation being adopted, but automation, not AI. But I'm sure that's going to come. I think the biggest trend we're seeing at the moment is around regulatory changes. I mean, we saw things like the APP fraud compensation coming into place end of last year had a bit of an impact. Not as much as we thought, and the industry thought, but there was an impact. Because of that, we saw the cost of transaction increasing, and then people looking at automation to kind of go back to a reasonable cost of transaction. As part of that, I think we see a number of people talking about what we call FinTech 2.0. So if you look at the FinTech today have taken a number of legacy processes and legacy software. They've built a very nice UI on front of it, and they've been great, in a lot of cases, it's great user experience. But the user experience still backed by some of the old process and some of the old system. And the reason it's a problem is that it creates, it's a bit dysfunctional in places, right? So that's where you see things like I get onboarded as a customer, but I get blocked within my first week because I have a transaction that doesn't quite work. Or I get blocked and it takes me 3 weeks to explain to compliance why it's fine. Or I'm getting offboarded with zero reason. And we're seeing a number of situations at the moment where SMEs get offboarded from their bank with no reason whatsoever. So that's because all those processes are not quite working together. What we call FinTech 2.0 is that through AI and automation, we believe that all of that is going to, technology, compliance, onboarding, all of that is going to work together. And therefore, the decisions that are going to be made are going to be more normalized, more homogeneous, and quick. That is going to make more sense, and the decision is going to be easier to address. So I think that's what's going to happen, but it's going to happen longer term. That's one thing we had built with Larex is building on stock exchange principle at Larex. What we built is a platform which was fully real time, highly automated, and all of that could work much more
Yeah, right.
less fashion effective.
Right, and because you mentioned this, what regulatory challenges are impacting the industry most significantly?
I think APP was a big one, APP fraud. Again, we all expected almost the end of the world on this one. Didn't really happen. I'm still not sure we've seen the end of it, but it's definitely not as big of a problem as we all thought, which is good. One of the challenge around the regulatory element is the pace of change that we've seen over the last couple of years has been very difficult for a lot of business to maintain. And as well, the disparity within UK and Europe, especially in places like crypto. I was talking a little bit about AI. Similarly, would be great to see more information from regulatory body on what they're going to accept from an AI point of view, because you could have an AI fraud system in place or onboarding system, but is that going to satisfy the regulator? So I think one of the challenges is going to be making sure that we understand what the regulator is happy to do or not, following those new type of approach. And as well, would be great to see some more homogeneity between UK and EES, because a lot of businesses operate across both jurisdictions. So when it's not quite clear, it's a bit difficult. And we're seeing that in crypto, creating some real challenges because the framework are not the same.
Right. So, what challenges do you think traditional financial institutions face in adapting to fintech innovations?
That's a good one. So traditional businesses, I think one of the challenge, and that's going to go back purely on tech, I think. One of the challenges that if you haven't built your business to leverage technology stack properly, it's really difficult to change. It's also really difficult to adapt legacy system. It takes a lot of time. So for traditional businesses, I mean, that's decent amount of time working for large banks and things like that. It is difficult to go back into the kind of the fintech to kind of start delivering fintech solution. And that's why we've seen a number of initiatives failing, and it's difficult for a number of reasons up to board level type of consideration. I think traditional businesses face countless challenges. I think what's going to happen is they'll start buying out, and it's
Mhm.
already we can already see that happening. Is that they start buying out fintech businesses rather than just trying to build them, they just buy them out. But then the question becomes, how do they integrate that as part of the ecosystem? I think what's going to happen is larger financial institutions are just going to become the backbone. They're not going to be client facing anymore. They're going to be, the mortgage provider behind, I don't know, Revolut Mortgage or behind, Starling Mortgage. They're going to kind of become the backbone of those fintechs are going to be through a couple of layers before it reaches the end user. I think that's what's going to end up happening because what they do really well is the traditional financial providing a traditional financial system.
Okay. And what do you think, in your opinion, most business owners are getting wrong when they're trying to address this specific problem?
Not enough market research, either pre-launch or post-launch. I am still surprised that I speak to businesses and I'm asking, okay, which feature are your user using the most? What do they want? What is their biggest problem? Which is the stuff they like the most? And they don't necessarily always have. There are some ideas of those answers, but they don't necessarily have the clear answer. And I think unless you understand clearly what your customer wants, it's difficult. But more than that, that want changes. I mean, what customer wants when you're a 10 people business providing one thing very well is very different than what they want when you're 100 people providing a series of services, right? And those customer group might evolve as your business grows. Your original group might not be the group you're servicing anymore. So you need to be very clear on what your current customer at this point in time like and dislike. And I think they don't spend enough time on that. I think there is an element, over the last 5, 6 years, we've seen at the beginning of that period a lot of investment going into fintech. So a lot of people are still trying to raise money at the back of ideas which don't necessarily make complete sense, or they don't have a clear rationale for why it's going to work, how are you going to generate money. I think it's happening a bit less now, but it's still happening a little bit. And I think at the back of that, what we're going to see is new fintech type of services that truly generates money, that
Mhm.
are truly viable. But for that to happen, there needs to be a cycle of technology innovation. So when you look at fintech today, cost of onboarding a customer is still very high. In some of the businesses, cost of retaining and servicing a customer every month is still very, very high. And unless you use automation to solve those challenges, some of the businesses will never be able to be profitable because their unique economics is just wrong. So I think we're going to see more adoption of automation and AI, and that's going to drive business model that can be truly.
Okay. And what advice would you give to these business owners who want to stay ahead of these changes?
Watch the market, understand really well what your customer wants, and be very, very careful about your unique economics and look at ways to drive them down whilst providing still providing a very good service. Don't be afraid to collaborate with what look like competitors. In previous, I've been very successful in my first exit was we sold to a competitor, right? And it was a very successful transaction.
Yeah, okay, wonderful, wonderful. Great advice, though. So, thank you for sharing those insights about you, about your company, and about the whole story. And thank you for this amazing podcast session.